Another thing to consider here in the working with the Germans, and I'm thinking back about a dozen, not 10 years, at least 10 years, when I was working on a pretty big project that involved um, a lot of politics with acquisitions of the company. And the acquisitions were not, there were some German acquisitions, but they're really small. And so they just kind of accepted, change everything, right? Change all your processes to the new one, to the mother company. But the other companies, the bigger companies that were acquired, that were French and English, British and Canadian and American and Chinese and Chinese and Korean. I worked all those countries, and French. I don't say French. Um, I worked all those companies, companies in those countries that were big, that were came with a big acquisition. They were acquired as small little companies to a larger company, and then it came as a larger acquisition, or they were large acquisitions. Okay, and that was another story because what they had put in their processes were probably better, right? Actually better. We actually said this in audits. We said that we actually showed this because I was also the auditor of ISO 9000 for the site, and so it was declared that the processes that these acquisitions were using, gets process oriented, right, were better than the mother company that had acquired them. And so there was an attempt to try to keep this in place because you don't want to kill off the processes that are doing really well, right? Um, but just for politics. Um, and so I spent probably 2 to 3 years on that project. Um, a pretty strategic project, company wide, and was one of the core people, kind of co-leading this thing. And I had a colleague from Germany that actually lived in the States, who had moved to the States a number of years before, probably been there about 10 years. And this is about 10 years ago. And the person had lived there for 10 years. And um, we'd be on the phone talking about, there would be project meetings, right? But then there would be the discussions. And he and I would sit there and talk. I would just ask him questions constantly. I mean, is this what we're dealing with? Are we dealing with German traits? Are we dealing with uh, certain types of German traits that are kind of because it's a company, a big company, or because it's this specific company? What is this? Because I wanted to make sure that I was separating what may have been, could be a generic German trait to nail it down to it. Maybe just a specific. I want to be careful, making saying that it's a generic one where it might be just specific to this company and a different. But it ended up being generic. I mean, but what I want to say in this video is that it enhances it. If you take these traits that we've been talking to, right, all these different traits, and if you put people in a large institution with politics, you know, and levels of hierarchy, you're going to find this even more, right? So, so it's going to be a natural place for all of this to even become worse. I mean, worse in the sense that it's so ingrained that it's standard procedural behavior to just believe this and just do it, and you're told to do it. Whereas um, people in small, I can really imagine smaller companies, small startups. They can't do this. They would die. They wouldn't get very far. The partnerships would never last, right? But because they're big companies, and you can actually afford the wasting time and afford wasting time and wasting energy and dealing with all this kind of stuff. Uh, uh, it's okay. But there were many discussions, and And that has led me, one of the things that's led me to do this video book, right? Thinking about that project, and just working with a lot of, I don't know, 10, 15 projects at least. Yeah, maybe a dozen or more, 15, maybe 20. Um, Maybe even more than that. I haven't counted them. Okay, were different projects and products. Where well, many more products. I mean, yeah, way more than 20. I consider all the products I've worked on too. Um, where there were German management. Okay, um, or German management or German leadership or German decision makers. Let's put it that way. Um, and it's always been a challenge, right? It's always been a challenge, but it's been challenging in different ways depending on who the people are, um, and depending on how well they understand working with acquisitions. That's a big thing too, right? So I've got a whole nother series of videos just about acquisitions, dealing with acquisitions stuff. Got a couple videos just on that. I'm going to be pointing out to videos here and there, and because I can't put everything into this thing just because I can't, I can't, if I start pulling things in just about acquisition stuff and mergers and acquisitions, we'll never end this book, right? But I'll say that I have done a couple of posts, at least one or two, about um, mergers and acquisitions and the challenges of that. And I've talked about them in different environments with different companies and in different, so one was an American company, and one was a French company, and one was and then another one was a German company. So I mean, three different key kind of things where there were definitely different types of leaders from different backgrounds, and I kind of explained that experience, how that went. But if you put the Germans, it's I kind of think it's kind of like the thing with Bill Cosby. He had those jokes about when he's drinking on the weekend, um, and he had a whole thing about drinking and what happens if you drink, and what if you're a problematic person? What is happening if you drink on the weekend? Or the drugs. It was the drugs and the thing. It just exemplifies it, right? It just makes it more of that. So um, if you take a person that is naturally inclined, based on their cultural background, to be very, um, process oriented and very domination is the way to go and the top down thing, and then you put them in a big company, it's going to be that's all going to happen that way, right? But if you put them on the small little company, they'll be like a fish out of water. They're going to have to survive, and they'll learn that. But if you put it in a company where all the hierarchy exists, and there isn't a forcing trying to kind of undo that hierarchy, it's going to just be so much more intense. Um, and that kind of gets really a kind of thing when you have other acquisitions that have their own leadership. They're brought in, and then they lose their leadership. That's really hard. That's really, really tough, because then the people feel that they've lost their identity, and then we get the Germans running them, right? That is a big challenge. Um, Been through that one too. Not so much that one. Yeah, I've seen it happen over time. It actually didn't happen immediately, but I've seen how it happens when it happens over time afterwards, and that's really a struggle. So this is this has been a long journey to learn this, and I've also seen that I've seen quite a few native speakers of English from different countries who have gone to live in Germany have kind of adopted a lot of these things, or at least work within it, um, and accept it, and 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 actually promote it, um, to a point where they've lost. So I don't know if they could say they lost the ability to work with people in the other situation, but it's so heavy on them, that they lose at least the traits that we can find from their own culture, right? So you can see that a lot. Um, that those are some of the things I've seen, in not just one case, but a number of cases. be interesting kind of do a much more deeper survey on that, like Pascal Boudry did for his book of about 400 people for his one book that he wrote on French and Americans. Um, but I'm trying to avoid anecdotal, just simple anecdotal evidence. I'm trying to pull together a number of examples that do confirm that these things are here. And but then I've done the book on right work in the French, and I've done the same thing in that. I've actually made the one about understanding understanding working Americans. I'll tell you that when I reveal a lot of stuff about Americans, that that helps people kind of get through the difficulties, right? So everybody's got their own difficulties. They're part of their own culture, and so it's all about chemistry, right? But hopefully this is things that you can keep this in mind as you're figuring out and considering the different cultures that you would be, you know how this applies, right? So and it is subcultures. Cultures are not just regions, okay? Cultures can actually be um, a domain or a corporate environment or a small business environment or a medium-sized business environment or like a certain environment like even restaurants is a subculture, right? These are all subcultural kind of contexts in which you'll get certain relations happening. So it's really important to take it in that consideration too, and just analyze the specific context because it might happen differently if a person actually put into another context. They might have a different result. Something to consider. So some of these cultural aspects, these cultural we call these domains, but sometimes we even linguistics we 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 talk about having different registers and like diglossic situations according to the specific situation, right? So these are different situations, different scenarios, different user stories. But I don't want to call them that because they're not. That's kind of software vocabulary, right? But domains, we just call them domains. At school, at work, with friends, you can actually use different registers with those and in language. And here it's the same kind of thing. You're going to have different registers, but you're not going to have linguistic registers. They're sociolex, right? And a lot of different sociolinguistic aspects that are going to affect how the people react within that specific cultural context. A very limited one it may be. So I hope this helps begin to pinpoint a little bit now down how to analyze situations and to figure out how to get through them and to work it for the best. So that's our chapter here on you know um, you know working in the kind of the different environments and how these traits can happen be even more enhanced by certain contexts that will large organizations and large institutions that will continue to sustain these traits, right? Compared to small ones that they probably would not sustain. They would have to be changed, or the person wouldn't last very long in the company with a little teeny shop.